We start with the story. In EduRenation, our experiences are the basis of our lessons. We share stories and derive learning opportunities by examining those experiences from our unique perspectives. Thus, one story can provide countless lessons, more so when we think more broadly and deeply. Here is an example of how this works. The day I became a soccer player, Dad promised to take my little sister Jamie and I to a professional soccer match on my 8th birthday, and the day had finally arrived. I donned my team reds that Mom surprised me with that morning, and Jamie wore her favorite white shirt emblazoned with the red 3. The game was so exciting that we forgot to eat our strawberry cones, leaving Dad's hands a pink creamy mess. Our team did not disappoint, scoring the winning goal in the last minute of regulation. There was another surprise waiting for me when we got home. It was a red cube-shaped box. I shook it, but nothing rattled. "Let me open it," Jamie shouted. I obliged. "It's a soccer ball," she shrieked. The card read, "As promised, an 8-inch ball on your 8th birthday. Love, Nana and Papa." Even today, I consider that birthday the best I ever had, and the day that changed my life. Now we will explore elements of that fictional personal story using 3 academic subjects, the famous or infamous Big Three: reading, writing, and math. We could have used other subjects, the physical sciences with chemistry and physics, or the humanities with art and history. We could have used even more than 3 subjects. However, these are familiar to most students who at some point have taken standardized tests at the local or state levels, such as the statewide elementary or high school regions that we have here in New York, or at the national level, as you see with the IC, ACT, and SAT exams, for example. Now, this passage was purposely written with a few flaws, just as we would when speaking casually. Yes, it reads quite formally, but trust me, it needs some editing, and we'll try to handle that in the writing section. So let's begin. We start with reading because there's no getting around it. Reading is fundamental. That doesn't mean that you can't make it through life not being able to read. Many have, but being able to read increases your quality of life exponentially. Missed opportunities, dependence on others, a limited view of the world around and beyond you are just a few of the disadvantages that go away as your reading ability increases. It is more than just being able to pronounce the words, though, saying them fluently and with expression. That's just the surface. That's like hearing but not listening, or eating but unable to taste and smell. True reading stimulates imagery, the words painting pictures and creating videos in your mind, transporting you to scenes in a novel. True reading rekindles personal experiences that make you one with a character in the story, provides you with a guide on how to write your own story, or opens the gateway to understanding the implicit world between the lines. Reading is fun, it's challenging, can be exhausting, it's rewarding, invigorating, inspiring, transformational. These and so much more epitomize this practice. Imagine, without it, we would have to depend on what others tell us and be compelled to accept their version of events as true. The abilities to learn, think critically, question assumptions and opinions, debate facts, and grow in wisdom are all magnified by our capacity to read, interpret, visualize, comprehend, respond, query, and inform. From reading, we are able to write and reason mathematically, which in turn enhances our reading powers. So we see how reading, writing, and mathematics, those three that we will focus on in this lesson, allow us to be our better selves. The first reading question is about vocabulary, which we know adds variety and flavor to language, keeping it from being repetitive or bland. The word donned is not commonly used. In fact, it sounds old-timey, but it's a real word. If your vocabulary includes this word, then you have an advantage. However, there is a clue for the rest of us, and it is in the same sentence after the comma. It says, and Jamie wore a favorite white shirt emblazoned with the red 3, just as the narrator donned her team reds. Both verbs, donned and wore, refer to both characters and their clothing. So donned most likely means to put on. Donned means put on. Now we could substitute that into the sentence and see if it makes sense. So I read, I donned my team reds becomes, I put on my team reds that mom surprised me with that morning, and Jamie wore her favorite white shirt emblazoned with the red 3. Let me see, that makes good sense. It fits. If we were to try the others, I displayed my team reds that mom surprised me with that morning. I showed off my team reds that mom surprised me with that morning. I prepared my team reds that mom surprised me with that morning. Those others don't work as well as put on does. And so the word donned in line 3 most likely means put on. The second question asks which of the following best summarizes the passage. In other words, the question is asking me to choose a statement that best represents what the passage was about. Therefore, it really helps to have read the passage all the way through. If I were to annotate each paragraph, I see here in the first one, the narrator is really excited about her 8th birthday that morning, and she's heading to the soccer game. So we can see here she's excited to go to the game. Okay, it looks like same. Let's put the game there. Good. And in the second paragraph, we see where she and her sister were so excited that they forgot to eat their ice cream cones. Right? So maybe I could underline this: excited. We forgot to eat our strawberry cones. All right. And in the final paragraph, we see here that there was this mystery surprise, this mystery gift waiting for her when she got home. It's a red cube-shaped box. And, oh yeah, it's a soccer ball. And came from her grandparents. And the best birthday she ever had. Day that changed her life. So maybe in this last paragraph you can say, life-changing birthday. Okay? So we now go to the answer options, and we see the first one says the narrator explains why she loves soccer. Well, it's clear she loves soccer, I see that, but I don't think she did a lot of explaining here. There wasn't any reason she gave as to why she loved soccer. So I think that rules out A. If we go to B, the narrator reflects on a transformative life moment. Well, she's certainly doing a lot of reflection here. It's a lot of remembering of what that 8th birthday was like. That's true. And she does say at the end that her life was changed, transformed. So those two parts of this answer make B a viable candidate. I'm just going to give it a little check on the side. C says the narrator enjoys going to soccer games with her family. Well, this much is true. Got that from the second paragraph for example, or maybe even the first. The third paragraph is not about going to soccer games. And certainly that should not represent the entirety of the passage. And so based on that, I would say C is not as strong as B. I say B is still in the running. And then D says the narrator loves the color red. Now, if C was not as strong a candidate, D is even less so. All right, loving the color red is not what this passage is about. And so that makes B our answer. The narrator reflects on a transformative life moment. The third and final reading question asks, the best evidence that supports the answer to the previous question is found in, then I have to choose one of these four options. Well, this last question is really asking us for evidence that justifies why our answer to the previous question was the best. If you recall, I chose B, the narrator reflects on a transformative life moment, as best summarizing the passage. So this question that we're doing now is really asking me for evidence that justifies my choosing of B. In other words, if I were to rephrase this question, it would be something like, which of these best justifies why the narrator reflects on a transformative life moment best summarizes the passage? So now with that rephrased question in mind, I can look at each of these options and see which one best captures that. And so I go to lines 3 to 4. It says, I donned all the way to red 3. So I read that. I donned my team reds that mom surprised me with that morning, and Jamie wore her favorite white shirt emblazoned with the red 3. That says nothing about the narrator reflecting on a transformative life moment as the best summarizing statement of the passage. And so that captures D, the answer D about the narrator loving the color red. And I did not choose D, I chose B. And so A is out. Then the next question, the next answer option rather, goes from lines 5 to 6. It starts with the game and goes to mess. And here the narrator is talking about the game being so exciting that they forgot to eat their strawberry cones, leaving their dad's hands in a pink creamy mess. Again, it does nothing to qualify why the transformative life moment is the best summarizing statement of the passage. If anything at all, that most likely goes to the narrator loving the color red, which is the answer D, not B. So that is out. If I go to lines 6 to 7, our team to regulation. Our team did not disappoint, scoring the winning goal in the last minute of regulation. Well, yeah, that's exciting. And maybe it's one way of explaining why she loves soccer. Or maybe even why she enjoys going to soccer games with her family. But again, those answer options do not capture what was a transformative life moment. And so by a process of elimination, the answer has to be D, but I'll read it just to make sure. It goes from even to life. And it says here, even today, I consider that birthday the best I ever had and the day that changed my life. Yes, it captures the recollection, it captures the reflection, and it testifies to that changing or transformative life moment. So clearly D is the best answer to this question. First, I feel the need to make the case for writing as a necessary subject area. In this day and age, when we all have voices and platforms to amplify what we say, and artificially intelligent writing programs to do the writing for us, I believe that the skill of writing is even more important. The last thing any of us would want is to have our words and intent misinterpreted, corrupted, or used against us. Writing to a common standard can be a great safeguard. Everyone adhering to the same set of rules, more or less, leaves less room for distortion, and a well-structured piece of writing can serve as our ultimate, original, true record to which many can return to as a primary source. We all know the cliche, the more people in the chain, the more the story changes. Well, I argue that our formal written record changes that chain into a circle at which our truth is at the center and serves as a reference point for others around us. Yes, I know, much of life doesn't really work that way. Besides, who needs to know the formal rules of any language when we can record ourselves in audio and video? Well, unfortunately, all of those are now easily faked, leaving that written record as our only claim to our truth. That said, let's do a couple of questions in this subject area. So in writing, it's less about the why and more about the how. How were sentences constructed? How was punctuation used? How were the verbs conjugated? And so on. Thus, we take on the role of an editor, ensuring grammar and other formal writing rules are observed sentence by sentence and paragraph by paragraph. Now, content is still relevant, so we need to keep track of what's going on. The first question refers to the first two lines in the story. Dad promised to take my little sister Jamie and I to a professional soccer match on my 8th birthday, and the day had finally arrived. So we see that in the first underlined part, Dad promised. And that by itself is fine. Dad is the subject, promised the verb, so that works. Right? Simple past tense verb, promised. Now, if I were to keep reading, it says, Dad promised to take my little sister Jamie and I, we have a problem right there. You see, Jamie is now an object, meaning the action is being done to Jamie. Dad promised to take Jamie. Similarly, Dad promised to take me. Jamie, me. Me would be the object pronoun that represents myself. And so I can't use a subject pronoun like I. That's incorrect. So I cannot be in that position. It has to be me. And the only one of these that works is the fourth answer, D, where it has Dad had promised and me. Now, if I were to read that and you see, well, promised to work, why change it to had promised? Well, had promised is what we call past perfect tense, and that matches with had finally arrived, which is also in that sentence. So we have a continuity of that pattern, we call that parallelism, and had promised, had finally arrived would also work. So that's why D would work in both cases, and that's the final answer. The second question refers to the lines 8 and 9 in the story. There was another surprise waiting for me when we got home. It was a red cube-shaped box. Now we have another compound sentence here, which is a sentence made up of two independent clauses. Independent clauses are like simple sentences. They can stand on their own, hence independent. And we see the first one here. There was another surprise waiting for me when we got home. That can stand on its own as a sentence. And it was a red cube-shaped box. That's another independent clause. Now, when you're joining two independent clauses, you can do that in a couple of ways. One, you can use a comma followed by a conjunction. And in this case, we have the comma, but there is no conjunction. The word it is a pronoun. It's not a conjunction, it's not joining anything. And so the missing conjunction here means that A is not going to work. If we go to B suggests that we come to a full stop. So we have a period after the word home. Yes, we can stop at home and make that a sentence on its own. But of course, the following sentence or independent clause needs to start with a capital. And since that's not the case here, nor is it in the answer, B is out. If we look at C changes the word got to returned, which actually sounds a bit more formal, so that's not bad. That actually is preferable. But look at what comes after the word home. It's a semicolon, right? That's the period with the comma below. And that is another way of joining two independent clauses without a conjunction. And so that means that C is a good contender for this answer. And then we go to D, which says returned home as it was. There's no punctuation there at all. The word as is used as a type of conjunction, but when as is used in that way, you're usually explaining what came before the word as. So the explanation follows the word as, and it explains what came before the word as. But is an explanation necessary here? No. We don't need to explain why another surprise was waiting for the narrator when they got home. Doesn't make any sense at all. So no explanation is needed. D is out. The answer is C. So here is math. This is the subject area that confounds or even intimidates most students. I once felt that way back when, and I was very fortunate to have secured two great tutors at different stages of my early academic life, Mrs. Wallace and Mrs. Sutton. They helped me realize two things that many math purists may bristle at, but they're my truths and I stick to them. First, throughout our entire elementary, intermediate, and secondary education, math calculations are essentially all about simplifying. Operations combine two values, we call those binary operations, and if the terms are alike, they become one term. For example, 3 plus 4 equals 7. You had two terms, it becomes one term. Second, math is a language. Yes, I said it, math is a language. Not necessarily one that's spoken, but certainly one that's symbolic. And like writing, knowing the rules helps out a whole lot. It's also reading comprehension. Anyone who's contended with math stories, those are commonly referred to as word problems, but I shun the negative connotation. Anyone will tell you that it's reading and comprehending. That means observing sentence structures, deciphering and inferring what a clause is saying, and keeping track of the context clues as you go along. The rules of algebra and the rules for ordering operations are the same. That's why one-step and two-step math stories that are solved using arithmetic rules are solvable using algebraic algorithms. The good thing is that algebra takes the guessing out of the process, provided you can translate the English words into algebraic variables, expressions, and statements, and then of course follow those rules. Geometry, another branch of math that is studied at these earlier levels, at least the Euclidean version of geometry, with its common two-dimensional shapes and three-dimensional figures, that's as much about mentally visualizing those forms as it is carrying out the rules that govern them. Many of those rules are indeed algebraic equations, which we call formulas. For instance, the area of a rectangle is equal to the length of the rectangle multiplied by the width of the rectangle, which, when abbreviated using algebraic variables, or letters in this case, becomes A equals LW. So algebraic formulas are found again in data analysis, statistics, and probability. So all of the main branches of pre-university math are interconnected. As you enter calculus, however, you enter the realm in which math is essentially more about proofs and logic, making sense of what we perceive around us. But that's for another day. Let's see how the story provides us with two mysteries we can solve mathematically. So the first math question says, in the story, the narrator had turned N years old, and her sister Jamie was J years old. At the time the narrator told the story, she had aged 2n-1 years, while Jamie had aged 2.5j years. How old was Jamie at the time of her sister's recounting? Now, first of all, don't try to eat the whole slice at once. Let's take small, chewable bites that won't choke us. In other words, let's take small bits of the story. We, of course, go back to the story as we learn to do in reading comprehension. And it says here that it was the narrator's 8th birthday. And so when the math question says the narrator had turned N years old, it immediately implies that N is equal to 8. So we have solved one bit of this story already. Notice I stopped just before the word and. And is a conjunction word. It adds on information. And so I'm not going to contend with that until I was able to chew and digest this first part that came before the word and. I've done that. I don't need to go back to this part of the story. That's out. It says, and her sister Jamie was J years old. Okay, I read that part, and according to the story, Jamie's age was never given. The only thing that says here is that Jamie was the narrator's little sister. So that of course implies that Jamie is younger than 8 years old at the time the narrator had turned 8. So we know that J is less than 8. Okay, so we can have that bit of information going. We don't need to go back to this. We're going to keep going. Notice how I am using the same reading comprehension skills. Read, interpret, annotate as I go along, gathering my context clues. Okay? At the time the narrator told the story, now that might not seem mathematically important, but if we think about what that part says, and notice again I stopped at the comma, it adds on information that comes afterwards. So again, the punctuation is a reminder for me to pause and think, just as I would if I were reading a passage. And when I think of what these words are saying at the time the narrator told the story, it suggests to me that we're dealing with two different times. Remember, the previous sentence started with the narrator turning 8 years old and her sister younger at that time. And from reading the story as we did it, we know that this story is about an older person remembering her 8-year-old birthday, her 8th birthday. So clearly, this little piece here is telling us that we're dealing with two different times. And why is that important? Well, it allows me to set up something along the lines like this. I can say age then, or maybe earlier, and then I can say the later age. That would be the age at which she's doing the recounting. Right? So there are two different ages here. And I could then say Well, this is for the narrator, and below is for Jamie. So age then for the narrator was 8. Age then for Jamie was J. And so this comparison of earlier and later ages allows me to keep track of these clues as we go along. We continue. She had aged 2n minus 1 years. Again, I'm going to stop before the word while. While adds on information, and I don't want to take on too much when I have not yet digested this piece right here. So she had aged 2n minus 1 years. Again, think about what that means. She had aged 2n minus 1 years. In other words, she had added 2n minus 1 years to her age of 8. Well, remember, we already know what n means. N is equal to 8. And so 2n minus 1 is 2 times n minus 1. That's what this means algebraically. And so 2 times 8 minus 1 is equal to 16 minus 1 is equal to 15. So she had added 15 years, the narrator did, to her age. So that means I'm going to add 15. And what's 8 plus 15? 8 plus 15 is equal to, it's a bit awkward. So do that. Write that structurally better. The 15 plus 8. And that's of course equal to 23. So the narrator is now 23 years of age. Remember, I've just gotten up to the word while. And look at how much I've already determined. It says while Jamie had aged 2.5 J years. Now, of course, time is the same for both sisters. So that also means that 2.5 J is equal to 15. Jamie's amount of years added is equal to the same 15 years. And using the rules of algebra to solve for J, I must undo this multiplication of the 2.5 to the J. That means I must do the opposite of multiplication, which is division. And of course, algebra, following the rules of reciprocity or quantity, where you do the same to the other side as you did to the first. That's the golden rule at work. Means that J is equal to 15 divided by 2.5, which on your calculator, or if you're familiar with quarters, 6 quarters give you $1.50. J is equal to 6. So we have J. J is now equal to 6. All right, we're close. So we have already gotten to this point. Now the question, how old was Jamie at the time of her sister's recounting? Well, again, that means what is Jamie's age at this later stage? We add our 15 to that 6, and that gives us 21. And so the answer in this case is D. Jamie was 21 years old at the age of her sister recounting the story. The second math question tells us that the gift did not rattle when the narrator shook it, suggesting that the ball fit perfectly inside the box, touching all 6 inner faces of the box. From the story, we recall that the box was cube-shaped. That's a big clue, because we know cubes are the same size of squares all around. We see here that the ball was spherical, obviously. So when it's put inside the box, you're going to have some empty spaces where the ball curves. And those empty spaces are going to be more towards the corners of the box. We were also given a measure of 8 inches in this story. Remember, it says here an 8-inch ball. So that has to be the diameter that was referenced in the question, the ball's diameter in the story. So far we have done all of this, done all of that, and we have gotten up to here. So the diameter of the ball is 8 inches. Now let's just represent the ball as a circle for a moment. Of course, this is not a sphere. That's not even a good circle, but let's take it for what it is. Now the diameter is that line that goes all the way through the center and sort of taps out on both sides. So if the diameter is 8 and this is in the box, then the box has to be just as high, as long, and as wide as this 8 inches. So therefore each side of this cube is 8 inches as well. So there you go. We have a huge amount of inferencing we can do just from that small part before the comma. And of course all of the information that came before the ball touching each face and so on. So now it asks us to estimate how much of that space inside the box was empty, not occupied by the ball. Now remember, space inside an object is a phrase that means volume. That's what our vocabulary tells us. Volume is the space inside a three-dimensional object. And the rules of geometry tells us that the volume of a cube is equal to the side cubed, which means we're multiplying the side by itself 3 times. In other words, V is equal to S to the 3rd power, which is S times S times S. And of course we know S is the same as 8 inches. And if we were to cube 8 inches, 8 times 8 gives us 64. 64 times 8 gives us 512. So the volume of this box is 512 cubic inches. Now, of course, the ball has to be smaller than the box. And if we were to subtract that volume of the ball from the volume of the box, we would have the empty space inside the box. Now, what is the volume of a sphere? That's a different formula. The volume of a sphere, I could just maybe put a circle to represent that. Volume of a sphere is equal to 4/3 multiplied by pi multiplied by the radius of the sphere cubed. Now, remember the radius is half of the diameter. So since the radius is 8, the diameter, since the diameter is 8, the radius is 4. So we have 4/3 times pi times 4 to the 3rd power. If we weren't using a scientific calculator that is capable of doing order of operations, we would cube the 4 first according to PEMDAS. 4 cubed gives us 64. But if we were using one of those TI-84 calculators, we would do all of this together, and this should give us 4/3 times pi, it has its own key, multiplied by 64, and that would give us approximately 268 cubic inches. And therefore, the empty volume is equal to 512 minus 268, which is equal to 244. That's why our answer is B. So we have seen how a simple personal story serves as a launch point for the study of different topics in multiple subjects. Essentially, an entire standardized exam can be structured using multiple stories in a similar manner. This is why personal stories are so important. They provide common references, personal relevance, relatability, opportunities for interpersonal exchange. They have the potential for social bonding, all while accommodating academic study and growth. Social and academic enhancement wrapped up in one. This is an example of our EduRenation philosophy at work. Individuals sharing their stories, that is strengthened by the diversity of those stories from different walks of life. That leads to stronger communities with institutions that are diversely intentioned, catering to more people of different backgrounds, and ultimately leading towards a stronger, more united society. That's where we're able to take on huge challenges that impact us all. That's the promise of EduRenation, the rebirth of education through the sharing and exploring of experiences. If you enjoyed this video and would like to see more, please like this video and subscribe to this channel. There you can find our first video on our EduRenation philosophy. It's also in the link below. And you can expect to find more videos on learning from shared stories in the near future. For more information on what we do and how we can help you, please visit our website at raredu.com. Thank you.